Hey everybody, welcome back to more Showdown in the Badlands reveals. And up today was, well, it was actually yesterday, it's Paladin. Sadly, it went up a little bit too late for me to do the video last night, so I'm doing it this morning instead. Paladin went in a direction I don't think anyone expected. We have Hand Paladin. You ever like Handlock? We now have Handadin. Okay, that doesn't quite work. Palahand. Okay. I don't know, someone smarter than me will come up with a name for it. Now, one of the cards we've got in Palahand, Living Horizon, 10 mana 4/6 elemental with Taunt and Divine Shield. It costs one less for each other card in your hand, so this rewards you for having a big, thick hand. How thick? Well, if on turn one, you start with your 4 cards. If you go card neutral, so like if you play cards that discover cards, that's fine. But if you go card neutral until turn 4, you'll have 7 cards in your hand, and this will be a 3 mana card. Therefore, in turn 4, you can play a 4/6 Taunt Divine Shield, which is pretty good value, honestly. Is it good enough to, like, ruin your first 3 or 4 turns? Probably not, but there are a lot of ways of generating cards within this deck. Now, immediately the card I thought of when I saw of this was Devout Pupil, the dual class Priest Paladin card, which was also Divine Shield Taunt, was a 4/5 instead, and could also be discounted by casting spells on friendly characters. This card did see play in the Libram Paladin deck, which was probably slightly harder to do than this hand buff condition, even though you could get your Librams to 0. It was a bit more situational. Unfortunately, Libram Paladin wasn't a particularly good deck in the end. Devout Pupil, though, was one of the better cards from it. I think Living Horizon, if a Palahand deck will work, that will certainly go in it. And you might honestly consider putting this into your mid-rangey or slower Paladin decks as well. Unfortunately, Paladin doesn't really run mid-range decks right now. They're pretty aggressive, so I think Living Horizon doesn't go into any of the current Paladin decks. However, spoilers for the future, their legendary is a Highlander card, and I think it will lead to a mid-range Paladin deck, or I hope it will do, because boy do I love playing mid-range Paladin. Just as a note as well, we have got card generation, as I said. Sinful Sous Chef, you can play that card, it'll generate you 2 more cards for the cost. Very nice. The Sunwell, that can fill your hand with cards to make the Living Horizon 0 cost. And also, do you remember there's a dragon package? Well, Malagos and Timeless Protodrake could also generate you a ton of cards. Like, Malagos could fill your hand with spells to make it cost 0. Timeless Protodrake could give you a dragon, which again is another card, to make the Living Horizon even cheaper. So maybe you'll see play with like a dragon package. But as I said, I think it's going to be some sort of mid-rangey Paladin deck. Also rewarding you for having big hand. 5 mana 1/5, the Lawful Long Arm. Rush, Lifesteal, Battlecry, gain +1 attack for each card in your hand. Twilight Drake is in tiers right now. So Twilight Drake was like the... I wouldn't say it was the core card of Handlock, but it was one of those classic Handlock cards, right? Anytime that Handlock comes into existence, if Twilight Drake is in the set, Twilight Drake goes into the deck. You have a big hand, maybe you get to like, 10 cards when you play this. You throw out your 4 mana 11/11. 4 mana 4, 11/11. That'd be insane, 4 mana 11/11. But yeah, 4 mana 4, 11. And your opponent couldn't clear it. And you could just use this 4 attack repetitively to beat down your opponent minions. Paladin has got it the reverse way. Instead of it buffing the health, it's buffing the attack. Which is not too bad because it has Rush, so it's going to go pretty quick, right? Lifesteal, which is always nice, right? If you're playing a slower deck, especially. If your opponent's going aggressive against you, play Lawful Long Arm. He rushes, kills one of their minions, and heals you back up for all the damage you took earlier. Very nice mid-rangey / control card. And again, I think if this Palahand deck is going to see any play, Lawful Long Arm will go into that deck. And here is the other Palahand card. The 6 mana legendary spell, the Badlands Bandits. Get 8 3/2 bandits with bonus effects. The bonus effects being the same ones we've had before. I didn't realize bonus effects has become a keyword now that it's used on multiple cards. So it's going to be the choice of Poison Reborn, Divine Shield Rush, Taunt, I've missed a ton out. But, you get the gist of it. I've not put them all up here, but it's basically just the basic keyword effects. Any that can't fit into your hand are summoned instead. We've got it. It's got my award. Worst legendary of the set. This card is terrible, I think. I'm 99% certain this is going to be truly awful, and it's the reason that Paladin will not work, but a mid-range deck might work. Okay, why have I got issues with this? So the closest comparison I can make to this is Rats of Extraordinary Size. There's never been a card that filled your hand before, and then any excess got summoned to the board. But having cards that summon minions to the board and excess goes to your hand, which is what Rats of Extraordinary Size did. That was 6 mana, it gave you 7 1/1s, but typically you'd have a minion or two on the board, so you might get some big rats in your hand. And you wanted the big rats in your hand, right? Because they were like 1 mana 5/5s. That was pretty disgusting. Badlands Bandit, you play it on 6, it fills your hand. Let's say at, turn 6, assuming you've been playing the game. You might have 6 cards in your hand. I think that's a reasonable assessment. So you're going to get 4 3/2s at 6 cost, and you're going to mill a card. That's great, isn't it? No, it's not. It's really, really bad. You probably don't want to mill your cards, because your cards are typically good. The 3/2 bandits with bonus effects, not all bonus effects are made equally. Reborn, is obviously better than something like Rush, but sometimes you might want the Rush. It's probably better than the Taunt as well. Otherwise, you're just getting 3/2 with Taunt. That's like a neutral card. It's an arena card. That is terrible. Reborn at least is, okay. Divine Shield is okay, but it's not a great reward. I said, the Badlands Bandit, I think the intention of this is that you play it with your elemental guy, and he becomes a 0 cost so that you can play him on the same turn, and therefore not overdraw. But I think more often than not, you're going to overdraw. You might also go, okay, Andalon, you're being cynical. At the very least, you can treat this as draw 8 cards, right? You keep saying Discover is equivalent to a draw. Excavate is like a draw. This is 8 dudes. It's 6 mana, draw 8, right? Wrong! How wrong are you? When you discover a card, you're typically picking the best card for the situation you're in. The advantage of Discover is you can discover a card that you wouldn't put in your deck, but is good against your opponent. If you're drawing cards from your deck, though, you're drawing cards that were good enough that you wanted to put them in the deck, i.e. you're drawing like a better than average card. If you're generating a random card, then you're probably getting something worse than, average, which is not great. And then typically when you get to more, like set areas, like discover a holy spell, or or even generate a random holy spell or something like that, generate a random fire spell, it makes the pool so finite that you can actually have an idea that you're going to get a better than average card, or, what you're going to get. So Octazari was Death Rattle draw 8 cards, which often caused you to overdraw. However, you're drawing cards from your deck. Badlands Bandit is effectively draw 8 cards that are 2 cost basic poor cards, basic arena cards that are below average cards. I.e., it's kind of just putting garbage into your hands. Okay, so there are some reasons why you can do this. I think they had to be really careful with this card, and I think they've erred on the side of too much care. So if you do fill your board with bandits, that's pretty good for stuff like the Crusader aura, where if they survive on the board for a turn, they can start attacking you. If they get the rush, they can also attack, and then they start buffing themselves on the board. My counter to this, though, is, and then you would get the 2 mana minions in your hand, right? That are just tokens that you're going to throw out there. My counter to that, though, is there's a big difference between like a 1 mana token like the Silver Hands you get from Sinful Sous Chef versus a 2 mana one. You can really vomit Silver Hands onto the board, which makes it harder to clear, which means your Crusader aura gets more value, and your Disco Mauls also get more value because you're playing more minions for the cost. Badlands Bandit, you might be getting a better card than the Silver Hand, but you're playing fewer of them. It makes your Crusader aura worse, your Disco Maul worse as well. The other reason you might want to play this, though, is that Paladin famous for hand buff. We have Muscletron and Grime Street Outfitter, which give you big minion buffs to hand. And I think this, again, is where they got a little bit spooked by everything. I think they thought, you're going to play your Badlands Bandits, then you're going to play a Grime Street Outfitter, because you're probably not going to play this on 6, because you're going to more likely than not overdraw. So you're probably playing this on 7 or 8. But let's say you play on 8, you play your Badland bandits, you fill your hand, the Grime Streak Outfitter comes into the board, buffs all the bandits in your hand, and your opponent cries, because then you're going to get 4 3s instead. I think this is just a pipe dream. It's just so slow. By the time you've done all this combo, you will have lost the game. Also, if you fill your board up with minions, Amatus is also better, but it requires you to have Amatus stay on the board. Amatus is fairly sticky because it can only take 2 damage at a time, but, you know, there's a lot of removal in the game right now. And then finally, obviously the big payoff was meant to be this Lawful Long Arm, the Living Horizon. It gives you your full 10 cards in hand, so Living Horizon would be 0. Lawful Long Arm, you could play it the next turn for an 11-5. 5 when you're 11-5, I mean, I know this is going to sound a little bit facetious. Is that good enough with Russian Lifesteal? Yeah, it probably is, but it's still not going to live that long, right? It's not a 5-11, which would be hard to remove. 11-5, reasonably easy to remove. So, I think this card will see 0 play. Alright, Holy Cowboys. I wish that's what I was saying to the previous card, but I didn't. 3 mana, 4/3, Battlecry. Your next holy spell costs 2 less. Someone who was very, you know, had the biggest Paladin rose-tinted glasses on would say, oh, it's kind of like Cariel, right? That was 4 mana, 4/3, Rush Divine Shield whenever it attacks. Reduce the cost of holy spells in your hand by 1. Sometimes Cariel would only discount a card by 1, sometimes it would 2. However, Cariel could do, you know, 3 or 4 as well, so you get insane value from Cariel. Also, she had Russian Divine Shield, so she has a faster response. Defense, she was a legendary, so it's a bit unfair to compare Holy Cowboy to Cariel. What is a bit more fair, though, to compare it to is something like Stormpike Battleground, which did see a little bit of play in Big Beast Hunter, where it had Rush Death Rattle, your next beast costs 2 less. Rush Death Rattle is actually fairly equivalent to Battlecry because you can quickly enable your Death Rattle if your opponent's got a minion with 3 or more attack on it and you rush into it. It's kind of like then Battlecry, your next beast costs 2 less, deal 4 damage. I don't think Holy Cowboy will see too much play. It might sneak into the Highlander deck though as a one-off, so... But other than that, I think there are better options out there for around turn 3. I don't think it will go into the aggressive token builds, and I think if you're going to run like if you're going to run a more value-orientated contest deck or something, I'm not sure how Holy Cowboy would still see play in that deck. We also have Hi-Ho Silverwing. 2 mana, 2/1 Dragon. Divine Shield, Death Rattle, draw a Holy Spell. Knight of Anointment is in tears. Okay, it's not quite the same as Knight of Anointment. A Knight of Anointment is a 1 mana 1/1. Battlecry, draw a Holy Spell. So quite a lot of play in Paladin because it's a 1-drop, it draws you a card. That's, you know, that's decent. And it tutors for a specific type of spell, namely Holy Spells. Hi-Ho Silverwing has Divine Shield. That's very nice for a 2 mana card. And it has it in the stats favouring in attack, which are also very good with Divine Shield. It's actually a pretty nice tempo aggressive card if another aggro Paladin deck comes from this. So you might want to consider it in that deck. Sadly, you get the Holy Spell as a slower reward because it's on a Death Rattle, not a Battlecry, and it's Divine Shielded, so you're probably not going to get it on the next turn. You might get it the turn afterwards instead. Still, it's pretty solid. Just as a comparison, Annoyatron saw some play in mech decks, which was a 1/2 with Divine Shield. The mech decks were often pretty aggressive, and this was statted in the way that it was more defensive, whereas Hi-Ho Silverwing is more offensive. And there is a archetype for Dragon still in Paladin. Do you remember they have a Dragon package? No, me neither, but they do. They have a Dragon package, so you could consider going for an aggressive Dragon-y deck, maybe with some of the token cards, and see where that takes you, but I don't think it's going to quite come to fruition. Where I think it will see fruition, though, is, again, I think there's going to be this Highlander mid-range Paladin deck. It's probably going to go as a one-of in there, draw your Holy Spell. You're probably going to have Garden's Grace in that deck somewhere, and you want to play as many Holy Spells as you can as fast as possible, so that Garden's Grace becomes very cheap and is a big swing turn. The Mad Lads, they finally did it. This is a quick draw card I think you will put in your deck. I know, I'm stunned as well. 2 mana tradable spell, Holy Spell as well. Lay down the law. Set a minion's attack and health to 1. Quick draw, then deal 1 damage to it. Now we're talking quick draw. Thematically, I like it. You know, Paladin is known for reducing minions' attacks and health to 1. That is just, you know, that's just a Paladin special, right? The quick draw effect basically makes this a 2-mana removal. I know it's not quite true. If you hit a minion with Divine Shield, they would set them to 1/1 and break the Divine Shield instead. So it's not quite 2-mana removal, but it's pretty damn close to it. It being 2 mana means the quick draw is more likely to be something that you can do. You're more likely to be able to draw it on a turn and play it instantly. And if you can't, it's tradable, so you can put it back into your deck and wait for later on to play it again. So I think Lay Down the Law has got a decent chance of actually getting into some sort of control Paladin deck. And there is a control Paladin deck out there. Kandor's Dancing Paladin decks. They might run this card. There's also some Titan decks that might run this card as well. They play some slower cards in there, so... and the Earthen Paladin, which runs the Titan as well, might include Lay Down the Law in it. It's very similar to the card that came out fairly recently, Judge Unworthy, which was... I think it was in the mini set, right? Where you set an enemy minion's health to 1 and you did 1 damage to all enemies. That's at 4 mana. It's basically 4 mana, kill a guy, and then Whirlwind, right? So, at the very least, Lay Down the Law is, if you get the quick draw off, 1 mana cheaper than that, so it's a better deal. And Judge Unworthy's been played in some decks. Now, are they the tippiest, toppiest, tieriest 1 decks? No. Do I think the mid-range value-y... It's not really... Oh, actually, it will be a value Paladin deck. What am I saying? Do I think this mid-range Paladin deck is going to be a tier 1 deck? No, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We have Prismatic Beam, another control option for Paladins. Deal 3 damage to all enemies. Costs 1 less for each enemy minion. Okay, interesting. We do have some cards in the set right now that have similar text. We have Crash of Thunder in Shaman, which sees a lot of play, which is deal 3 damage to all enemies, costs 1 less for each nature spell you've cast this turn. And Slithering Death Scale, which is a 7 mana 5/9 Naga, which is if you cast 3 spells while holding this, deal 3 damage to all enemies. That sees 0 play. Mainly because Slithering Death Scale is just too expensive to justify its effect. It's not actually that bad a card, it's just... There's better things, right? You don't want to be spending 7 mana to do 3 to all. It's just too expensive. Yeah, Prismatic Beam, therefore, kind of sits in between these. Crash of Thunder, you often can control the mana cost because you're playing the cards yourself, you're proactively playing them, and you can often get it to a 0 mana. I don't think there's going to be too many situations where Prismatic Beam is going to get discounted to 0, i.e. your opponent's going to have 7 minions and you want to wipe them all out. There might be some situations though where that comes to, you know, fruition and you're really happy to have this card. What I think is more reasonable is to actually compare it to Consecration, which is already in Paladin. That was 3 mana, deal 2 to all enemies, so if you just bump the mana 1 up, you could kind of say Prismatic Beam. If they have 3 minions, it's probably worth playing your Prismatic Beam to clear them. You're getting something in similar value to Consecration, which isn't great. It doesn't say play everywhere, but if you're a control Paladin deck, you'll be putting this card in your deck, right? Just in case an aggro turn comes up. Hell, if you go against Token Paladin, for example, they can put 7 minions out on the board pretty quickly. This is going to cause them big sad times. Now we get to the new aura for Paladin. Paladin seems to be getting a theme where they get a lot of auras now. It seems to be not quite class specific, but you know, it's a class identity at least. Deputization Aura, 3 mana holy spell. Your leftmost minion has +3 attack and lifesteal. Last 3 turns. Awful. No offense, but not very good. Compared to Crusader Aura, which gives you all your minions +2/+1 after the attack for 1 more mana. I just don't think you'll ever run Deputization Aura. It's just not worth it. Typically, I mean, you could say maybe you run both the auras, but I think that's too much setup, right? It's going to be too slow. If you want to choose one or the other, you're going to pick Crusader over Deputization because you don't really care about your health. Your health is a resource in those decks. All you want to do is get as much attack onto the board as quickly as possible. And actually, it's kind of nice if your minion does get a little bit of health as well for an aggro deck, just to make them harder to remove, especially since they're often going to be running 1/1s. And 1/1s are easier to remove than 3/2s. Showdown! 2 mana spell. Both players summon 3/3 outlaws. Give yours rush. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to award another award. The worst epic of the set! What a terrible card! So it's got a near symmetric effect, and if you're going to have a near symmetrical effect, or a symmetrical effect for that matter, there has to be some way where you can abuse the symmetry, so it's actually better for you than your opponent. Otherwise, you're spending 2 mana to do nothing. And you may be pointing out to me, yeah, you just put a Crusader aura on it. Yeah, but if you've done Crusader aura into Showdown, which means that you will get 5/4s that attack into the opponent's minions, and, you know, it kills them and leaves you with, like, 5/1s at the end of it. That's 6 mana for 3 5/1s. That's not a great deal. And it took you 2 turns to set it up, probably. Or at least 2 cards to set it up. The juice is not worth the squeeze. There's honestly not a lot of cards that Showdown seems to work with that well. I kind of compared this a little bit to Twin Fin Twin, which doesn't see that much play. And even when, like, Bran was in the core set, which gave you, like, 3 2/1s, which had Rush on it, that didn't really ever, you know, see any play. You didn't buff this thing to give you more minions with, like, 1 health more attack. I think it's not going to do anything. I don't understand why Showdown has been printed right now. Other, like, small potential outs are your Titan, which makes your minions only able to take 2 damage at a time, which means that you could trade them all in and have 3/1s left over. Wow. It's so much setup, it's just not worth it. Why is this 2 mana? I don't understand. I don't understand. Finally, though, you may think, you know, I've been a bit harsh on all of the Paladin cards, and I have. This, though, is a beauty of a card. The other legendary, the Highlander legendary for Paladin, 3 mana 3/4 beast, undead as well. Spirit of the Badlands. Battlecry, if your deck has no duplicates, get a permanent Mirage, and the Mirage is at the start of your turn, transform into a copy of a minion in your deck. This stays in your hand. Chef Kiss. This is... It's turned it all around for me. I was going through all the Paladin cards and I was like, oh, this is so underwhelming. I like playing Paladin, but this is going to be another expansion where I'm probably not going to play too much Paladin. And I saw this legendary, I was like, I'm playing Paladin this next expansion. Holy value, Batman. This is insane as a card. The first thing I thought of was Sister Svalna, which sees a little bit of play in Priest. Not as much anymore, but that gave you a permanent Vision of Darkness, which was a 3 mana card that let you discover a shadow spell. The Mirage, however, it's not discovering from a pool of shadow spells from Priest. It's minions you've put in your deck, so you can tutor for great minions. What minions? Well, let's say you have the Mirage in your hand, the Countess is in your deck. You get the Mirage as the Countess, and you play another Countess this game. That is disgusting value, playing the Countess twice. In fact, one of the things that stopped the Countess from being absolutely disgusting was a lot of the bounce cards are in neutral, so you can't really play them with the Countess. Unless you're going to Giga Greed and try and play some neutrals in your no-neutral deck, which I wouldn't recommend. Now you can do it with Mirage, and also, just a note, when the Mirage turns into a minion, it doesn't change again until you play it. Once you've played the Mirage, and it becomes a Mirage again, and then when your turn starts, it becomes another minion in your deck. There are other than, great legendaries. You might want to run Tyr in there for some extreme mid-range value, and I think that is going to be something you're going to do. The Leviathan, great card. It's going to be 8 damage rush. Give you a dredge, a draw. Very, very solid. And then you might even do some cheeky plays. You might be able to fit in Stewart into this deck. You Mirage your Stewart the Steward. You play the Mirage, and later on you play Stewart the Steward. Hey, your button is now summoning 7/7s. That's a good button! And also, you're not limited to just doing this, Countess type no-neutral deck. You could put some neutrals in there. I saw someone on the old X, or Twitter for anyone that, enjoyed good branding, mentioned you could put Ambassador Fail in your deck and get, infinite Colossi. Yeah, you could. You could get a lot of Colossi with the Mirage, which would be pretty backbreaking for a lot of decks. You could also put something like Vorthamar Theron in the deck and just Giga Greed it, because that buffs the stats of all minions in your deck. If you Mirage a Lothar, and then play it, then your Mirages in the future will be the buffed cards, which is disgusting value. So I think there is going to be some sort of mid-range Mirage value Paladin deck out there, and possibly that will be the real seller for this expansion for Paladin players. I think maybe then some of the Palahand cards make it into that deck. I'm not 100% certain on that though, but Paladin's got some really bad things, and I think they've got some really good things. Anyway, that's going to do it for this reveal. If you've enjoyed this one, don't leave a like and subscribe. Everything helps me out. And I'll see you next time, where I think we are in the land of the warrior. Maybe. Goodbye.